This is Get Real with Bob and Stacy, the show that helps you learn about the mortgage and real estate markets. Get the inside scoop from their expert list of guests and have some fun along the way. Now, here's Bob Gallagher and Stacy Alcorn.
Welcome back. You're listening to Get Real with Bob and Stacy. You're joining us for our Leaders and Legends segment. Joining us by phone today, we have Dr. Daren Martin, culture architect and author of A Company of Owners. Welcome to the show, Daren.
Hey, it's great to be on with y'all. Thanks, Bob and Stacy.
So I have a whole bunch of questions for you. Both Bob and I run pretty large organizations, and I would say that one of the biggest or hardest parts to figure out in a company is culture. So first, explain to us what a culture architect is.
So I go into companies, I figure out what's broken, where the disconnects are, and I help them straighten it out. In my experience, there's a really big gap for a lot of companies between the stated culture, which, you know, that's obvious. That's what's on there. You see that when you walk into the lobby. It's on a big poster somewhere. And what I call the hidden culture. And the hidden culture is the way people behind the scenes say things really work at the company. So, you know, stated culture may be, oh, yeah, that we pride ourselves on treating everyone with respect, et cetera. But you get down into the hidden culture, and people will consistently tell you that's not the case. Or we welcome ideas, you know, or we're up for continuous improvement, and then people will tell you, no, that's not the way it works at all. Ideas get shot down on a regular basis around here.
So is it possible to figure out how much money that costs a company, like a bad culture?
It's an obscene amount of money. I mean, I'm not sure how you would monetize it, but, I talk about this in my book, A Company of Owners. Gallup consistently shows a 29% engagement level at most companies. And that means we're working with about a third of the workforce really engaged. So just do the math on that. I mean, if you're operating on 30% of your workforce really showing up, really being active, really involved, treating the company like they own it, then you're leaving a lot of money on the table by ideas that go unspoken or by people just not bringing their A game to work. It's huge.
That's interesting. So let me ask a question. So in my company, I own real estate companies, and occasionally you have people that don't seem to fit in. And oftentimes I find the people that don't fit in are the ones that are constantly like, me. Like, they're not really concerned about the company or the other people sitting next to them. Is there any way to fix that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you definitely want, I talk about, you don't want a family, you want a team. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people talk about a family where everybody kind of gets along. The problem with that sort of setup is that, things can go unchallenged, or people let low performance just go along, or they let people who are not really team players be on board. Netflix has one of their culture, mandates is we do not hire super intelligent jerks. They say it's just too hard on our teamwork, right? So they've kind of made a policy of hiring A performers and expecting them to act like A performers. And part of that is you've got to have an enterprise focus. It can't be me against the world kind of thing, because what's the point? You might as well go run your own deal if that's the way you're going to operate.
That's interesting. Is there any way to predict in advance of hiring somebody, like through the hiring process, if someone's actually going to fit your culture, or is it throwing spaghetti against the wall?
No, absolutely ways to predict. It's interesting that if any of us are ever thinking about applying for Chick-fil-A, I'm going to give you a little tip here. One of the things that Chick-fil-A will do in their hiring process is a manager will inadvertently knock some papers off of the desk. And if the person that's being interviewed just sits there with their arms crossed and lets the manager reach down and pick up the papers, they're not getting hired. I mean, there's a pretty good chance they're not getting hired. Because they want people who go to the action. And I say in my book, people who go to the ball, right, to where the action's taking place. So there's all sorts of little tricks and interview things that you can do to, you can't absolutely ensure, but you can certainly narrow the odds that you're getting to somebody who's really going to act like an owner.
Yes, that's awesome, because I think a lot of times in the hiring process, like, it's almost like people put on a hiring persona, like it's not really the person that you end up with.
Yeah, absolutely. And people, put on this face. But the reality is, here'd be another little test. Actually, I just came up with this, just thinking about this. But I think the way that people treat other people is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe in the middle of the interview, have somebody come in the door and deliver, bottles of water to both of you.
Interesting.
And if the person being interviewed doesn't even say, hey, thank you, or wow, I really appreciate it, but just kind of takes the water and goes on, focused on the interview, well, then kind of how they're going to be treating people at all levels within the company at work.
So as a business owner, is there anything that I can do? So we have a stated culture. What can I do to ensure that we're actually living by the culture, especially as our company grows? I think it's almost easier to control when you're a smaller company and there's 10 people than it is once you have 300 or 400.
So it's so important that you build that foundation when you have 10, so that when it expands out to 400, you've continued that. I mean, you look at some companies. Netflix is a good-sized company. I mentioned Chick-fil-A. Southwest Airlines has traditionally been known for their culture. A lot of what you find in some very large companies. Oh, I'll give you a perfect one. I actually talk about them in a company of owners, the Ritz-Carlton. Consistently when I ask audiences, have you ever stayed at a Ritz-Carlton? Yes. What kind of service? It's superb. Is it consistent no matter what Ritz you're in? Yes. Well, how are they able to do that? And it's because they have a training program. They've got certain expectations. They have a mantra, as I talk about in the book, instead of a mission statement. Either y'all know what the mantra is for the Ritz-Carlton?
No.
It's we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen.
That's cool.
Bam, drop the
like
mic.
that.
I mean, that's perfect because it kind of tells you how to act in every situation, in a way, and the metrics by which to do that. Starbucks is another one that's great at kind of instilling their values into their people. So, obviously Starbucks has stores all over the world, but they've hardwired that in. And the sooner companies go, oh, we're only 10 people, it doesn't matter. No,
Right.
It really matters, especially if you plan on growing. Otherwise, that gap just widens.
So is it possible, and I have my own thoughts about this because I have gone from a 10-person real estate agency to a 400-person real estate agency. And, in theory, it seems like you can systematize your culture. And I'll give you one example. So back when I had 10 real estate agents, we would celebrate everybody's birthday and get them gifts. And not only that, we would give gifts to the kids and spouses of our real estate agents. And we still do that today. However, we've systematized it. So every card that goes out to our agents and to their spouses and their kids, it's the same card. It's the same gift. They get chocolate brownies. And I feel like it just loses its cachet compared to when we were like a 10-person company and you'd actually go get a gift that really mattered for that person. Can you really systematize culture, or is it impossible?
Well, obviously, I think the value of what you were doing early on was it was very personalized and had that touch. And I think there are ways to continue that on a larger scale. If it gets to be, it's like the company Christmas card, and it comes in the mail, and it's got a, computer signed sort of signature. You don't put a lot of stock in that like you would if it was a handwritten note from the CEO or somebody, maybe your manager. So one of the ways to do that, I think, is to not get stuck on, well, it has to come from one person, but it can come from people. Managers, so you've got someone over 10 people that is doing that and personalizing that. That's part of their job description, is to make sure that those things are taken care of. They've got a certain amount of budget that they're allowed. You've got to change your process the larger you get so that you can maintain that level of intimacy with it.
So what are some of the big mistakes you think that companies make when it comes to culture?
One of the biggest is not listening. I talk about in the book, don't shoot the messenger, and I can't tell you how many companies I've gone into. I've interviewed 80 people from all levels in the company. 78 of them are all saying one thing. When you go back to, management or the powers that be and say, hey, it sounds like this is going, no, that's not true. That's not happening here. Okay.
Yes.
So just not paying attention and listening, because most people want to talk. They want to talk about what's broken. They're living with it day to day. It may come off as griping or complaining, but make sure that you're listening, particularly when, as I say, they're complaining about the right things. You know, if it's just, you know, I don't like the snacks in the snack machine. Well, it may be an important deal. But when they're particularly talking about how hard it is to get work done, or the levels of bureaucracy they have to go through, or equipment not being in functioning order, they're trying to, you know, alert you to things that are actually costing you money as a company, and those are things that you really need to be paying attention to and inquiring about.
So do you have any advice for companies that do like mergers where you're actually combining with another company and you're taking two different cultures? How do you incorporate it into one culture?
Wow, yes, that's a fantastic question. I went through this about 7 years ago with a company where they took two very divergent cultures. And I remember distinctly having a conversation with the CEO at the time, and I said, hey, you know, we may want to think about doing some change management here. And he said, no, we'll just throw them together and let them work it out. Well, 3 years later, after mayhem had just ensued, they kind of woke up and said, hey, maybe we kind of need to do something to fix this. So you're much better off on the front end, really understanding those cultures, spending a lot of time and energy. You know, it's the time you spend on the front end is going to be well worth it, and the dividends it's going to pay by that merger going together a lot more smoothly.
So in the businesses that you work with, how much are the employees engaged in like directing the company culture? Like, are there groups that get together that organize events for the company, or is it more like top down, that the top says this is our culture and this is how we're going to implement it?
So I think we need both, right? One of the things I run into is people who say, well, I'm just whatever. I'm just a clerk, or I'm just a assistant, or I'm just a frontline worker. I can't really impact. And I think that's nonsense. I had somebody send me an email once and say, okay, after our conversation, I'm going to give the company a chance. And I wrote him back and said, no, that's ridiculous. You're not giving the company a chance. You are the company. You know, you don't get to stand outside the company and make judgments. The flip side is that management or leadership within the company goes a long way to establishing that. I mean, look at Alan Mulally, who really was instrumental in turning Ford around. Ford now has a 78% approval rating among their employees. I may have those numbers backwards. It may be as high as 87%. But the point is, it's one of the highest, if not the highest in the country. And it's because he really took that organization and implemented a whole new thought process, a whole new leadership style that he modeled, but he certainly had to have other people playing along, or they would not have seen that kind of shift.
That's interesting. By the way, what brought you to write A Company of Owners? What's your background?
So I ran my own business for 20 years, and I felt a lot of the pain that goes along with that of just, having people that are really fully engaged. I've always been in the entrepreneurial space, always just, whether I was working fast food or I sat groceries for a while, treated the company like this is my business. But that's a mindset, and that's certainly a mindset that can be trained, but it's not something that a lot of people come into the workforce with. So I did that for 20 years, and then for the last 10 years, I've been in and out of Fortune 500 companies, all the way down to mom and pop companies as well. And really, the book Company of Owners was just born out of seeing the frustration in the workplace and thinking it doesn't have to be this way. I actually had a conversation with the CEO of a $20 billion oil and gas company, and I told him, you need to fire your employees. And he was like, Martin, what are you talking about? We can't fire all our employees. And I said, no, you want owners. You want people to act like owners. And that's really what sparked the idea. It's actually become quite the buzz phrase around that company.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you think there's any correlation between a great company culture and the pay scale of the employees of that company, or no?
Absolutely, but maybe not a direct correlation. People will actually work for a lot less money in a culture that they really value. Now, that's not incentive to go out there and create a great culture so you can pay people less. But I also think that companies that build great company cultures tend to have a certain mindset, and as a result of that, they're going to tend to pay their people better. What I have discovered, what you can't do is you can't pay people, a whole bunch of money and not pay attention to anything else and then expect the culture to be great. That in and of itself will not drive success at a company.
Right. And can culture ever be great in and of itself? Like, do you ever experience companies where the management didn't have some sort of role in creating the culture?
Well, I was just in Vegas this week and actually dropped off books for Tony, the CEO of Zappos, and they are experimenting with that. They are one of the first companies to adopt what's called a holacracy, and they have basically done away with management. They said, we don't have supervisors, we don't have managers, we're going to hire people for certain roles, and then we're going to give them the tools they need. And that's a really competitive company, tough to work for, partly because their culture's so great. They're a great example of, they're not paying an obscene amount of money per hour for their call center, but people love working there because they get to, bring a little of themselves to it. They're really given a high level of authority and leadership capabilities. They get to make decisions.
And
contrast that with.
Yeah.
I walked into my cleaners the other day who had lost my clothes 6 months before. Don't ask me why I hadn't noticed, but they called me and said, hey, we found some clothes. We put them under a different name. So I go in, and the guy says, he said, oh, here you are. I said, thank you so much. Really appreciate you finding these, tracking down. He rings it up and goes, okay, that'll be $24. And I'm just like,
oh, my God.
I go, wait, you're kidding, right? And I didn't care about the $24 really. I cared about, I cannot believe this is happening.
Yes.
Well, the long and short of it is, he goes on and says, listen, I have to charge you out. The owner could maybe make that decision, but I have to charge you. And I thought, well, this is clearly not a company of owners, right? That employee, I don't blame him,
right,
had not been empowered to make that kind of decision or to think, just think about this, how ridiculous this is. You're going to charge me for clothes you lost 6 months ago.
Wow. All right, so our time is up. Give us 2 companies that every company should aspire to be.
Wow. So I think Netflix is a great one. And let's go with an opposite end of the spectrum, In-N-Out Burger. So it just goes to show that and I'm going to throw in the Ritz-Carlton as well. It doesn't matter what the price point is. It doesn't matter what kind of business they're in. Any company can have a fantastic culture, and those are the companies that are going to thrive while everybody else is diving.
That's awesome. This is Dr. Daren Martin, and you can find him at acompanyofowners.com or whiteboardmodels.com. Thanks, Daren.
Thank you, Daren.
Thank you.